So, I need to congratulate you first. After a long day at work, you've come here to listen to data protection talk. It's not the most thrilling of subjects, but I'll try to keep it relevant to party wall and only focus on the stuff that actually matters. Stuart didn't mention Party Wall Pro is one thing, but I'm also a solicitor, and I've actually worked in data protection for quite some time. I was the data protection officer of a multinational financial services company, and that's how I came across the GDPR, and I had to read it from top to bottom. And it's while reading it, I realized that some of the provisions were actually quite relevant to you guys, and that's why I wrote that article in Whispers, and then did a webinar on it, and then I've been asked to come here tonight. When I first talked to Stuart, I was like, well, that was the 25th of May. You're a bit late for that, but apparently there was some interest still, and doing a bit of research into what happened since the 25th of May, there's a lot of companies out there that still struggle to actually be compliant on an ongoing basis. So I'm gonna try to cover that. So let's look at what it is. So it came into force on the 25th of May this year, replaced the Data Protection Act 1998, as you know, and why it has made such a noise is because the fines are quite substantial. So you can be fined up to 20 million euros or 4% of your worldwide turnover, which means a lot. So it's 20 million or 4%, whichever is greater. So this is why people are getting a bit exercised about this. The thing that matters to you is that the definition of data has actually been broadened. Before, you didn't really care about it, and I don't blame you, but it's because you were never dealing in sensitive personal data, which was the data that the 1998 Act was more concerned about. Now, the definition of personal data is information that relates to an identified or identifiable individual, which is very broad. And this is why I'm here tonight. It's to actually try to explain why it applies to party wall surveyors. Tonight I'm just going to whiz through what's new, what's been introduced by the GDPR. I'm only going to focus on the bits that are relevant to you. How it affects your business, and then what you need to do to be compliant if you haven't done anything yet. So, what happened since the 25th of May? I thought I'd do a little bit of digging because it's quite interesting to see. So, the Information Commissioner's Office, which is the entity in this country that regulates data protection, was flooded with complaints, GDPR complaints. So 1,200 in the first month, and we're at 6,200 something as of the 3rd of July, actually. So that's an increase of 160% year on year. And this is quite interesting because it seems like everyone knows about this now, and people are starting to just complain to the ICO for X or Y reason. On the day the GDPR came into force, Google and Facebook were dragged into, and people started complaining about the way they dealt with their data. And in the same month, Instagram and WhatsApp were dragged into it as well. So if those complaints are upheld, they can each face a fine of up to £3 billion, and that's before lawyers' fees. So you'll say, well, how does that affect me, right? You're a small surveyor practice, and it is actually awareness. I think private clients, business clients are more and more aware of what the GDPR is, what data protection is all about, and are looking into how their contractors, how their third-party suppliers are dealing with their data. So if you cannot demonstrate that you are GDPR compliant, you can face fines, obviously, that's the worst case scenario. There's a reputational risk around it as well, because those type of complaints go public now, and you obviously heard of BA's disaster, and it basically affects your bottom line. So what I'm going to start with is the changes introduced by the GDPR. So the first one is the right of access. So nothing new, because subject access requests were covered by the 1998 Act, but it's again broadened the scope and broadened your obligations as to what you need to deliver to data subjects. So what is a subject access request? It's basically an individual who wants to try and figure out what you have on them. So they will send you a nice letter asking for a myriad of things, and you will need to respond to that request within a month. So I'm just going to go through the list of the things they can actually ask you. For the confirmation that data is being processed, so are you processing my data, Philippe Whalen? Do you have my data, yes or no? For what purpose are you actually processing it? So this is, you have to be able to demonstrate that you have a legal purpose for processing it. For you guys, you will be processing data in order to fulfill your obligations under the Party Wall Act. So that's one of the legal purposes. Details of recipients, who are you sharing that data with? And there might be a long list, but you need to think about that. Details of nature of data held, what are you holding? Name, surname, email address, home address. Your holding period, how long are you actually holding the data that you have on owners, adjoining owners, your customers? Do you have a data protection or data retention policy in place? So you need to be able to tell them, well, I'm holding that for 6 years, for 20 years, or for 30 years. You have to let them know, and this is a weird one, that they have the ability that they can, or that you can correct mistakes in case they discover any mistakes. So if you have misspelt their name, you have to correct that. And a notification of right to complain to the ICO here. So you have to proactively show them that they have a right to complain to the ICO. So this is the kind of stuff that you have on websites, in your privacy policies, or in your terms and conditions. And your data collection point. Where did you get that data from? So obviously, if it is employee data, you got it directly from them, and they consented to you processing. If it's adjoining owner data, it's the land registry portal. And so the important bit to keep in mind is know what to share and what to withhold, because I got this email from a surveyor asking for advice on a data, on a subject access request. And he was about to dump a whole load of emails that he exchanged with the other party's surveyor. He was acting for 2 adjoining owners, and the subject access request came in from a disgruntled building owner who wasn't happy about the fees he was charging and went on a fishing expedition. So what people tend to do is they just dump everything and say, okay, here you go. Your name is at the bottom of an email. I'm going to send you this email chain of 20 pages. But don't forget that you have a duty of confidentiality as well. So you are allowed to redact stuff. You all you need to do is actually figure out, show him or her what data you have on him or her and how you're processing it, and go through that list. But you don't need to dump all your correspondence with various parties involved. So keep that in mind. And why has there been a flood of subject access requests? And you'll probably get one of these soon. Is you've got a lot of apps and websites like wanderlegal.co.uk that allow you to just draft a subject access request letter within a couple of seconds and for a couple of quid as well. But you'll see this is a close-up of the second page of the letter. So this is actually what they're asking you to provide. And this is the whole list of stuff that I just covered, even more. So when you get a letter like that, you have 1 month to actually provide all this. And it's some people freak out when they see that. But I'll explain to you how you can get ready for that and how you can deal with it. Second change is accountability and privacy by design. When I first saw that, I was like, it's the world gone mad again. But it's basically trying to change the mentality around data protection. Because let's face it, a year ago, data protection was something that you never thought you were going to sit through an evening like this and listening to that, right? But so it's kind of working because you're here tonight. And what it is, it's governance, basically. It's trying to shift the mentality and make people realize that they need to do something proactively. So Article 5.2 introduces this kind of element of being proactive in order to demonstrate that you're complying. So proactive steps to demonstrate compliance are implementing technical and organizational measures. So technical is obviously the kind of IT stuff behind it. All this data protection can only be dealt with information technology and protected, unless you do everything on paper still, but that's not a way out of it either, because if you lose your papers, you'll still fall under the GDPR. And so the technical skills, do you have the technical capability to actually demonstrate that you will be compliant with GDPR, i.e., are you protecting the data that you have in a sufficient way? And organizational measures. This is the kind of paperwork that needs to go with it. So these are your data protection policies, internal or external facing, your HR policies, all these papers that show that you've actually thought of it and that you've done something about it. And I'll walk you through those a bit later. Maintaining relevant documentation on processing activities. So this is the Article 30 records. This is to demonstrate that you've done your homework, that you've looked at what data you are processing, how you're processing it, and if you have the technical ability to actually make sure it is secure. It sounds a bit difficult, but I've just put something together to show you how it could look like. So it's basically a spreadsheet showing that you've done your homework. You've got the data category. This is the kind of stuff that needs to go in there. Purpose for processing it, the recipients, who are you sharing it with, transfer to third countries. This is quite important because if you're transferring data outside of the EEA, the US, for example, if you have servers that are based in the US, if you are using an IT provider that is US-based, some of that data might end up in the US. You need to record that. Retention period. Do you have a retention policy? Do you actually just across the board 6 years and deal with the rest when it comes to it? Or do you have specific retention periods for any type of data? If you look at the ICO's retention policy, it's crazy how detailed it is. And your IT security measures. This is, do you have a provider that helps you keep it safe? So this is actually a requirement under the GDPR. You need to have a document like that people can look at if need be. If you go on the ICO's website, they have a template This is one that I've put together myself, but they have something that goes into much more detail. So have a look at that if you want to just use that one. Third measure is appointing a data protection officer where necessary. So this I'm not going to cover because 99% of the case you will not need to appoint a data protection officer. Okay, so under the GDPR it only applies in very specific situations, and you will not fall under one of those unless you are working for a public authority. So if not, so I'm not going to cover that here, but if you have any questions about it, come and see me after. But I see too many people wasting too much time on this question, and too many companies appointing data protection officers where they don't have to, because there's a cost involved and is also a major responsibility. If you, in your company, you have someone who's in charge of data protection, don't call him or her a data protection officer, because that will have more more obligations will ensue if you actually call it a data protection officer. It's quite funny. So don't, please. And a data protection impact assessment. So this is a risk assessment of what type of data are you dealing with in a specific project. So this is done on a project by project basis. In party wall, I don't really see it applying because the personal data that you deal with doesn't go too far. It's limited to name, surname, and home address. The only thing I was thinking about is if you were working on maybe a major refurbishment of a hospital, for example, you might have to shift patients from one wing to the other while you do work on one wing or the other, and you might come across sensitive personal data. So I don't know if I'm just making this up, but it's that kind of project that you will need to assess whether there's a risk associated with the data that you'll be dealing with or come across. Can your systems and your processes, are they robust enough for you to actually be able to deal with it? So, and this is just looking at the situation and saying, okay, I think my systems are robust enough, tick a box and move on. So, but there's an obligation there for you to assess those projects. So include in your data protection policy, internal one, that if you work on a project where data is more sensitive, that you need to have this risk assessment. Does that make sense? So the third change is breach notifications. So under the 1998 Act, you had an obligation to inform the ICO if you were a victim of a data breach. So this is not new, but of course the scope is broader and the time frame is much shorter. So what is a breach? So a personal data breach means a breach of security leading to the destruction, loss, alteration, unauthorized disclosure of or access to personal data. So it's just not one of your employees losing their laptop. So, and this is important because your staff members need to know that, because you need to be able to report it. So what type of breach do I need to notify? So the obligation is for you to notify the breach to relevant people. But what type of breach is, according to the ICO, assessed on a case-by-case basis. But what you need to keep in mind is a breach that leaves individuals open to identity theft. So this could be interpreted in major different ways, but name, surname, and home address, I think, is enough. So this is the kind of stuff, if you lose your adjoining owner spreadsheet, you might want to send an email to the ICO. So who do you need to notify? So under the regulation, you have to notify the ICO on the one hand, and the individuals concerned. And going back to what happened to BA a couple of weeks ago, I'm sure you must have received an email from BA. I did, and it looked like this. And they actually managed to send it, I think, within the 72-hour rule. But we'll see, because they're probably going to end up paying a huge fine. And it doesn't say much. It says, we're deeply sorry that you've been affected. Please call your bank and make sure you sort out this mess for us. But the idea here is actually to make sure that I am aware of it, and so I can look at my bank statements and see if someone has actually done anything with my bank details. And this is a process that you need to have in place. And in order to do that, you must know what data you've actually lost. So because if you need to tell the 100 adjoining owners that were on that list that the data has been stolen or lost, you actually still need to have it somewhere. So that's why it's important to have data on different servers, because if one server gets hacked, you still have that data on another server. And when do I need to notify? So this is the 72-hour rule. So you need to notify the ICO and the individuals within 72 hours of you discovering the breach. So I can see some people already thinking, well, if I don't discover it, then I don't need to report. But going back to the privacy by design approach is not going to be a defense, because you are supposed to have a monitoring process already in place. You have to have the kind of capabilities of your IT provider to ping you a message saying, or within the hour, that there's been a data breach. So you can try, but I don't think it's going to work. And this is quite important because, of course, there's another fine if you don't report in the right time frame. Please keep in mind that the regulation really was meant for the Googles and the Facebooks of this world. But it does make business sense for any business to be prepared, especially for the subject access request. So how can you be ready for this kind of stuff? I think, first of all, you need to be aware of it and kind of educate your staff, because something like that will happen when you're on holiday. And it's also having the systems in place. So this is why, I'm just going to do my sales pitch here, but we actually, our customers will be informed within the hour if something happens. And this is just because, we are an IT provider. But other IT providers do that too. If you put your data on their servers, they have to have some sort of process in place that if there is a breach, they will inform you immediately, and they will know exactly what data has been compromised. So now, how does it affect your business? It's as I was saying before, it is awareness. It's people being professional clients and just individuals. People know about data protection nowadays, and that's why there's so many subject access requests that are more. I don't really know what the purpose is, to be honest. It's really disgruntled people like trying to waste your time, but people are aware of it, and you'll need to be able to demonstrate that you do care. In tendering processes, I don't know if you've noticed, but the initial qualification questionnaires have more and more data protection stuff in there. And why is that? It's because people that look for contractors or suppliers need to be able to demonstrate up the chain that they have looked at data protection as one of the qualification criteria. And auditors are having a field day of it. They've spotted a golden goose again, and I don't know if you've heard or noticed, but the new, the big fours are now really looking into data protection, and it's painful. So if you are a contractor of a bigger company, a big construction company, big landlord, you'll be asked those questions eventually, because they'll be asked those questions by their auditors. So being ready just makes complete business sense. And lastly, you actually do process personal data. How do you process personal data? Land registry searches. So you act for a building owner, you'll try to figure out who the adjoining owners are. You go on the land registry, you copy and paste name, surname, home address, sometimes email. You collate that in a spreadsheet, and that's it. You're processing data, and you'll be in control of that data. And some of you may think, well, this is public records, right? But you are compiling that data, and you are then processing it on your own computers and stuff, and that is enough to fall to be covered by the General Data Protection Regulation. The other situation is a big landlord that will dump an Excel file with hundreds of tenants on there, with name, surname, email address, and sometimes a lot more than that. I've had a couple of people ask me about this. What I tend to say is, you're not so, well, I tend to say, no, you're not a controller of that data. You will become a processor, because the controller is actually the landlord. So what I suggest people to do is, when you get dumped, a spreadsheet like that is say, thank you very much. I assume that you have the authority to actually, and the consent to share that with me. I will be processing that data on your instructions only, and I will be destroying that data once we're done with the job, and then maybe follow it up with an email when you've destroyed it. Because that puts you in a processor position, and it also shows that you kind of care about the stuff that is on there. It's just a proactive step to say that you're doing something. Now, what you need to do to comply. So it sounds much more complicated than it is. But first thing is, try to do a data protection audit, which is a really fancy word for try to dig out what you have and how you're processing it. So first thing is, what data are you processing? So the likelihood is that you'll have HR data, so employee data, and that can be sensitive sometimes, depending on what you actually record, medical conditions and stuff like that. How do you deal with that data? Building owner data, adjoining owner data, third surveyor details, other surveyors' details. That's the kind of stuff that you will have. CCTV, if you have CCTV cameras. This is normally outsourced, so you don't really have to worry about it, but you still have to list it. How are you processing it? Are you processing that personally? Are your servers in your business premises? Are you outsourcing that service? If it is outsourced, I'm sure you all got those emails before the 25th of May that was saying, we've updated our terms to be GDPR compliant. Here they are. And the homework that you just need to do is to make sure that your IT suppliers have updated their terms, and that they will process your data in accordance with GDPR. What policies do you have in place? So internal policies and external as well. If you have something in place, update them if you haven't done so yet. If you have nothing in place, let's just get to work. So, because it's part of that paper trail exercise that you need to do. I know it's not fun, but we'll get there. And do you process data fairly? So So the fairness principle is one of those new ones that not fairly new, but again extended. You must not process the data in a way that is detrimental, unexpected, or misleading to the individuals concerned. And this unexpected definition is covered by Article 14. So, and this is, well, I thought was quite relevant for party wall surveyors, is the data that you collect from the land registry. When you collect data from a third party or third party source, as opposed to the data subjects themselves, you need to inform those people that you hold that data and you're processing that data. And when do you need to do that? At the latest, at the time of the first communication to that data subject. And this is when I thought, well, actually, because what we do is we get data from the land registry, we prepare our notices and our covering letter, and we send that out. And under Article 14, you would really have an obligation to tell them who you are, they would know that, and all these things that we saw before, and that you have to actually share with them. So what is it? Your identity and contact details, the purpose for processing, again, categories of personal data that you hold, i.e. name, surname, home address, recipients, so who are you sharing it with, period for which you will be holding that data, existence of the right to request, yeah, that's a long one, so it's as before, so can they rectify? Can they ask to be erased? Can they ask for any restrictions on processing and objecting to processing? A right to lodge a complaint to the supervisory authority, i.e. the ICO. And where did you get that data from? So it's a lot of information to stick into your covering letter. And this is why I've shared this before on my webinar, but I actually had a go at drafting a little paragraph that includes all these 8 points, and that works quite neatly. If you want it, come and see me afterwards and I'll email it to you. But I'm going to walk you through so identity and contact details. So this is the paragraph and this is the requirements. Identity, so please note that we insert blank. The purpose, so the purpose of fulfilling our duties on the Party Wall, etc. Act 1996. This is one of the lawful purposes for processing. The categories of personal data, limited to your name and address. If you process more than that, just make sure you amend that. Recipients. So external recipients of the data will be limited to those contemplated by the Act. You could extend that, but I think for our purpose this is enough. The data will be stored for no longer than required under the Act and applicable law. So this is kind of a fudge to future-proof it. And then mentioning that you have the right to request a copy of the data, its amendment, deletion. Oh yeah, so I put subject to our duties under the Act having been fulfilled and no appeal period being outstanding. This is to try and avoid any disgruntled owner meddling with the process. And the right to lodge complying with the Information Commissioner's Office, and then where the data came from. So the Land Registry portal, but you can play with that too. So this would be something that you would include into your covering letter, and it would cover you for this obligation on Article 14. And you can demonstrate that you've done your homework in doing that. So had you asked a law firm to draft that for you, it would have cost you £2,000. So now, what you need to do if you get one of those letters that you get through wanderlegal.co.uk, dealing with an access request is what I'm more thinking you should do is have a playbook, have a 2-pager outlining what will happen if you get one of those, so that if it comes in the day before Christmas and everyone's away, that at least a PA can actually do it. So determine who's in charge of managing, project managing it, because you have 1 month in order, before or to respond to that. Standard answer. When you get the letter in, you'll have to kind of send a letter out again saying, we've received your access request and we're looking into it and we'll get back to you within a month. How to access the data. So this is the tricky point, is if Joe Bloggs is asking for the data that you have on Joe, how are you going to find that? Do you have the kind of process, do you have the IT capabilities of doing that? And this is something that you have to kind of look into. Do you have a searchable database? We, P&T World Pro, obviously, we have a database with all the kind of stuff in there that you can cross-search and get the relevant stuff out. But I think if you use an IT supplier, they're able to do that for you. You have to deliver something in a readable format. So think of how you're going to do that. It's not just files that are 20 pages long and with no really relevant stuff. And the deliverable, i.e. have your kind of cover letter ready for the response with the data attached. It is just trying to think about getting ready for that, because you'll get one eventually, and monitoring who's actually in charge of monitoring that you will be doing that within the relevant time frame and properly. So yeah, as I said, it's just a playbook to have ready, and it doesn't take too long to prepare. How to deal with a breach is the same kind of stuff. So how do you monitor potential breaches? And this again is the kind of the IT part of it, is how can you make sure that you know that a breach actually took place? And what usually happens is that you get an email from a client or a friend saying, I got this email from you with a weird link. I don't think it's from you. That's when you realize that you've been hacked. And so by then it's normally too late. You have to be able to know within the hour that someone hacked into your system. Again, who's in charge? Who's in charge of dealing with this? Keeping in mind it's 72 hours that you have to do something about it. Who will need to be informed? You know that, but make sure that you have the kind of letters and emails already ready to just send out so that you don't panic. And how do you inform? Do you decide to inform by email, by snail mail, and just have that ready? And who's in charge of monitoring time frame? Because it's 72 hours, and it's going to happen on Christmas Eve, right? This kind of stuff. So if you have that playbook ready, at least you know what to do, and someone in the office will know what to do. So the last thing is data protection fee. I thought I'd mention it because it's something that no one really talked about. The ICO, I've been talking about the Information Commissioner's Office quite a bit. They've been inundated with work, and they need to be funded. I think they recruited a lot of people recently, and this is why the data protection charges and information regulations came in on the 25th of May as well. It was kind of more discreet. But under the old regime, you had to register with the ICO if you were processing or controller, data controller of the relevant data under the Act, which probably most of you never really registered, and the registration incurred a registration fee. But now the new regime is, if you are a data controller, you'll have to pay a fee, and that's it. And of course, the ICO has a right to fine you if you don't pay a fee. So what is the fee? 3 tiers: micro-organizations, maximum turnover is 632,000, or no more than 10 members of staff. £40 a year. It's not too bad. Tier 2, maximum turnover 36 million, or no more than 250 members of staff. I think the majority will fall under Tier 1. And then Tier 3 is larger organizations don't fall within Tier 1 or 2. 2,900 is it's not nothing, right? But the reason I wanted to mention it is actually because the ICO will, of course, assume that you fall under Tier 3 if you don't tell them otherwise. So make sure you tell them otherwise. So, but of course, having said that, there are exemptions. If you deal in personal data or process personal data for these purposes, staff admin, advertising, accounts, blah, blah, you can be exempt from your data protection fee. And I'm sure someone is looking at this one thinking, ooh, what about a quasi-judicial function here? So I'll leave it up to you if you want to challenge the ICO and say that, you know, I'm acting in a quasi-judicial function, so I'm not going to pay the £40. But if you do, let me know, but I wouldn't sweat it for 40 quid. So to conclude, actions to take now, you've got nine action items. Data protection audit. Have a look at what you have a look at what you process, how you process it. Internal data protection policy. Train your staff. There's a lot of free stuff out there. We're actually recording this tonight, and the P&T might share that so that you can show it to your staff members as well. Information security and data breach policy. So this is your kind of data protection policy, as it's called. Have that ready. Drafting this will force you to actually think about what you have in place and what you can do to improve it. Review and update your privacy policy and cookie policy. That's your website stuff. If you haven't done so already. Your Article 30 records. It's good to have. You do it once, it will be the same in 90% of the cases. You review it annually, and you'll see that stuff should not change too much. And then a data protection impact assessment policy. So it's a piece of paper saying that, you know, if you're working on a particular project that has sensitive personal data, then let's have a look at it. Let's have a look at our policies. Let's have a look at our systems. Can we actually deal with that type of data or not? And then a data protection fee, and so that's it. So actually, with the P&T, we looked at all this, and we got a quote from a law firm, and it was about 17 grand they wanted to charge us. So it doesn't need to be that expensive, but there's a bit of work involved. And if you need any help, you know, feel free to come and talk to me. And that's it for me. I hope it wasn't too dry, but it is a bit, it's a bit of a depressing subject, really. So if you have any questions, please.
Any more questions?